from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word and another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, May 1st, 2020. We've got a lot to talk about, and we're going to even bring you some stories and move outside the coronavirus stories today and bring some interesting facts that you didn't know. To begin with, we got the Battle of Puebla. If you haven't ever heard of that, it's a battle that may have changed the course in history for the American Civil War, and it took place in Mexico. Great little story we're going to bring you today. Then we're going to talk about changing laws for the youth and the gender, and that's going to be brought to us today by a minister here in New Orleans, Mr. Clayton Evans. COVID-19, the new debt crisis that this is creating, not just here, but around the world. And then we're going to continue in our series with the Nuggets portion of the program, A Man to Stand in the Gap. And this is part of the Lessons from Lincoln series that we're working on today, right here, News, Nuggets, and Insights. But let's begin, first of all, with a little short story. Last week, we talked about the oil collapse. As we were watching the program, there was a news headline last week came in, and it talks about negative prices in oil. In other words, the prices were dropping so fast that they felt like you couldn't give the oil away. And eventually it went to, and what you're looking at right here on that screen, $37 a barrel negative. That means that oil traded, somebody was paying somebody to take those contracts off their hand. They paid them $37 a barrel for oil. Yeah, like you're stuck right here. So now, that was last month's settling, all right? That was the May contracts, for those who don't know what that is. Oil, they produce so much oil every month, and it's sold in advance. So people buy up the oil depending on what they think the prices are going to be. So those were the May contracts. They were expiring that day. So when that expired, then the June contracts come in because May's gone, June's in. Then, of course, you got July, August, and September, and you'll notice different prices as it goes out. Monday, all of a sudden, the June contracts began to tumble also. It's the same problem. There's nowhere to put the oil. And until the world starts up again, until it goes back in business as usual, they're going to continue to have oil that they can't get rid of, and there's nowhere to put it. So that's what's going on. So on Monday of this week, oil tumbled again. Now it's down to $12.33 a barrel. And as of Tuesday morning, I've already began hearing that they believe what's going to happen here, and there's still got some time to go, that oil has the potential, unless there's something going on, or some movement around the world, it's going to go negative again this month. So anyway, I wanted to bring that to you because what you don't see is when this happens, hundreds of thousands of jobs, millions around the world, they're losing jobs. The companies are shutting down. Companies are going bankrupt. For example, the oil rigs, when they were last year about this time pumping 1,700 rigs offshore, now they're down to under 500 rigs pumping oil. So they've lost 1,200 rigs, and they're still trying to cut back. The oil fields up in the middle of the country are shutting down, people out of work. That means entire towns that built up over the pipeline will begin to just close down entire towns. This is a big problem, and it hasn't surfaced yet how big it is. It also interrupts, when you see this, it interrupts the food chain, getting food to you. So the processing plants are beginning to have problems not only with the COVID, but the actual movement in oil and what they need to be able to bring food to the supermarkets. So we haven't seen it begin. So the people who want to go green, take a look at what's beginning to happen, because if you go green and there's no way to replace the energy, that's what you're looking at. So I just wanted to bring that out. We'll bring out more and more of this information as we go. But I've got a great story here I want to share with you. I did not know this story until last week. It was actually brought to us in our meeting. When we finish taping News Nuggets and Insights, each week our team gets together and we go around the table, see what everybody's got in the story. This was brought to us by Danny Ellis and says, man, we got a great story here we need to go look into. This is the true history behind Cinco de Mayo, all right? Cinco de Mayo. So what we want to begin with is a video, and as Paul Harvey said, this is the rest of the story. Let's play that video. I'll be right back.
Cinco de Mayo, or the 5th of May in English, is a celebration of Mexican heritage. Over the years, many people have come to believe that it marks the day of Mexico's independence, and that's, well, just wrong. The 19th century was particularly brutal for Mexico. After a bloody struggle to win its independence from Spain in 1821, the fledgling country fought America from 1846 to 1848, and then a civil war beginning in 1857. These conflicts left Mexico's economy ruined and its army exhausted. The nation had accumulated war debt and just couldn't repay its European backers. Mexican President Benito Juarez declared a 2-year suspension on its loans. That news didn't sit well with England, Spain, and France. So in 1861, those nations planned an invasion, but France wasn't out for just reimbursement. Napoleon III wanted to overthrow the Mexican government and install a French monarch in the Western Hemisphere. When England and Spain realized France's true intent, they withdrew support. Napoleon believed that Mexico was too weak to defend itself against his superior military. In 1862, over 6,000 French troops landed at Veracruz and headed toward Mexico City. But a surprise was waiting. Mexican General Ignacio Zaragoza and a few thousand militiamen waited behind fortified walls in the city of Puebla. The French marched into town on the 5th of May. The outnumbered Mexicans opened fire, killing 1,000 French troops. After a 2-hour battle, the remaining French retreated. Word of the victory spread throughout Mexico, and Zaragoza became a national hero. Later that year, the city of Puebla was renamed Puebla de Zaragoza, and Cinco de Mayo was decreed a national holiday. But Napoleon wasn't celebrating. Upon hearing of his army's defeat, he sent 30,000 more troops to Mexico. Within a year, the Mexican army was crushed, and Napoleon installed his Austrian cousin, Archduke Maximilian, as the nation's leader. Maximilian's rule was shaky from the start. Most Mexicans were still emboldened by the Cinco de Mayo victory and celebrated the holiday with songs and dance while under French occupation. Mexico's future president, Porfirio Diaz, led an uprising in 1867 that finally overthrew the French army. Maximilian was shot and killed. His bullet-riddled shirt is still on display in Mexico City. Cinco de Mayo had become Mexico's rallying cry. People remembered it with feasts, mariachi music, dancing, and picnics. The celebration continues today, both north and south of the border. In fact, commercial interests in the United States have made Cinco de Mayo very festive, even though many people aren't aware that the holiday is a tribute to General Zaragoza and his nation's resistance against foreign domination.
Little known history of Cinco de Mayo, but that's not the whole story. That's only the top of the story, and I want to bring you the rest of the story that's buried even below the one you just saw. This involves the Civil War, the church, and the future of this nation. The headline reads how Cinco de Mayo helped prevent a Confederate victory in the Civil War. So it went beyond what was going on here. Is that in 1861, Abraham Lincoln had a proclamation before God for prayer and for fasting to protect our nation. So in 1862, God seemed to answer that prayer in this little battle down in Mexico. So how does that take place? It's when a small, scrappy Mexican force handed the French army a surprise defeat in 1862. The Confederacy was denied the potential ally. All right, so now let's go on. I've got it out what the story is, so follow this story. It's an amazing little story. Following Mexico's default in 1860, which you just saw in in the video, Napoleon III planned to conquer Mexico. Cinco de Mayo actually marked the unlikely defeat of the elite French forces by an undermanned Mexican army in the Battle of Pueblo in May 5, 1862. This fact, as the underdog, Mexican victory may have played the part in preventing the French Emperor Napoleon III from helping the Confederacy win the American Civil War. So how did that come about, and what was he looking at? Is to begin with, they were telling them that they would support slavery in America if the South would support their army moving into Mexico. So Napoleon figured that if he could get his hands on Mexico, it would become the first colony in the new French stronghold in North America. Figuring that Abraham Lincoln was too busy fighting the Civil War so that the Americans wouldn't stand in Napoleon's way, that he felt he would come in unopposed to be able to put in a new colony just south of America to be able to work his way into America itself. Even better, when the French puppet government installed the Mexican city, Napoleon could also provide the guns to the Confederacy in exchange for Southern cotton, which was a scarce commodity in Europe thanks to the Union blockade. So the French were upset that the blockade was taking place back then, so they were going to come in and underhandedly work in from the south, take over Mexico, would control the Gulf of Mexico and the shipping lanes and be able to bring in the support that the Confederacy needed to supply because they didn't have the armament that the North had. Had they done that in 1862, the Union forces were under such pressure that there'd have been no way to be able to stop this movement. God seemed to intervene at this point to slow down that battle so that the Confederacy could not gain ground. Going on. So in early '62, the well-trained French forces under General Charles Lorenzo marched from the port of Veracruz with the aim of capturing the Mexican city. But on May 5th, the French took a surprise beating at Pueblo at the hands of the Mexican General Ignacio Zaragoza and a ragtag group enlisted as volunteers. The French army then retreated back to Veracruz to lick its wounds and wouldn't return until a full year later in May 1863. So why is that important? All right. The year-long delay in the French invasion gave Abraham Lincoln's generals just enough time to win a decisive Union victories before Napoleon could provide upgraded artillery and munitions to the Confederacy. An amazing story. But it doesn't stop there. What took place during that particular course of the year of 1863 in the Civil War? So now, in 1862, things weren't going well for the Union in the Civil War. And here at Pueblo, there was clear-cut victory that completely threw the French timetable off. All right, so this is from Hayes Bautista. The news report just electrified the Latinos and jolted them with a whole new level of organization and activity. So out on the West Coast and parts of the West itself began to support the Union rather than the South, which was originally going on. So that prevented the Confederacy beginning to expand across the South. At that time, on January 1st, 1863, this is where everything began to change. Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation freeing the slaves in America. Then, by March 3rd, 1863, Lincoln presented the Prayer and Fasting Proclamation to be held April 30th, 1863. And in that proclamation, if you've watched Our Constitutional Christian, you've heard David Barton talk about, at this particular time, the Union forces had only won 2 battles. After this proclamation, through the Civil War, they only lost 2 battles. So during this particular time, God held off the enemy, Satan, just as he's done so many battles for our great nation. It seemed like weather or circumstances prevented the enemy from destroying the Union that God was beginning to build in these early stages right here. So on April 30th, there was a day of prayer and fasting that Abraham Lincoln read to our nation. Just 17 days later, the second battle, Pueblo, took place, which defeated the Mexican army. But by that time, the tide of the Civil War had changed, and it was too late to send help to the Confederates to turn the tide back to the South. And that's the story you never heard before. God's hand protecting the nation to fulfill his destiny to bring it from sea to sea, 50 great nation, picturing 50 freedom in America. So anyway, that's the story behind Cinco de Mayo, the story you never heard. So now, let's turn the story now. We're going to invite Clayton in here, and he's going to talk about how the New York State and the rest of the country, which will follow, who are now beginning to permit minors to self-identify as other than something of their biological sex, and if I'm not mistaken, without the parents' permission. Is that right, Clayton?
No, with the parents' permission.
All right, Clayton, tell us about this.
Thank you, Tom. Today's lesson is an important one. I think it's very important, and it's called identification manipulation, because that's what people are doing these days, and it's a terrible thing in my understanding. And see, so who are we really? We are either male, man, or a woman. We can be no other. Nature says so. This is important because what are we? Can a man become a woman or a woman become a man? No, this is not possible. No, we are male or female. So, what is happening? People have been practicing what I call self-rejection. If a person is born a male, so is he. If born a female, so is she. Yet, some believe they are the opposite sex. Unbelievable, but they do believe that, and so they try to change to the opposite sex rather than correct their hearts or their minds. Okay, what is the problem? A problem comes about when the legislature decides to give a person the right to change the birth certificate of a confused person to be what that person thinks he is rather than what he really is. And really what they need to do is work with the mind of the person to help him to accept himself. Otherwise, they're just going along with this program. And so, all right, so who did this? Minors can now change their sex on their birth certificate in New York. Transgender and non-binary minors in New York are now allowed to change their sex on their birth certificate. Unbelievable. According to the Office of the New York Attorney General, Ms. James, the new policy will allow individuals under the age of 16 to apply for their sex to be changed on their birth certificates without the need for a medical affidavit. They don't need anything from a doctor. Instead, minors at age 16 or younger can make the request with their parents' or legal guardians' permission. The request must include a completed and a signed application by their parents or legal guardians, as well as a notarized affidavit form affirming the gender identity of their child. The Attorney General's office wrote. Now here is more to the story. The rule's goals is to allow transgender or non-binary, which it doesn't really exist, people can make things up in their own hearts and minds. So individuals to alter the sex marker on their birth certificate to reflect their gender identity. The passing of the new policy was praised by its advocates, the Dallas Voice reports. The actions courts today rid the state of the discriminatory, outdated policy and keeps New York rightly among the states leading the country with policies that respect the lives of transgender people, said Omar Gonzalez-Pagan, senior attorney for Lambda Legal, calling the announcement a victory. So they support people whose mind is not right. So then I call this, again, identification manipulation. I have to say that word right. So we know from biology that the sex of a person cannot be changed. What can be done? Well, they can manipulate it. All right? Problem number 2 is, now that a person can manipulate their bodies so that they can live as the sex that they want to be rather than what they are, no longer can you meet someone, fall in love, and get married. Why? Because you don't know who that is. Do you know if that's a man or a woman? Not unless you check. So no longer can you trust even the birth certificate. You need to know the family. Then you hope they would tell you the truth. Really, the only truth is it so that the only truth can be found in the Word of God. The scripture says to put your trust in God, not in man. So now we really need to prove all things, hold fast to that which is good. So that with God, we pray that God will help us to be separate from the world. It is becoming more abominable. So Revelations 18:4 says, come out of her, my people, that you will not be partakers of their sins. And really, it's important to, that the laws not be changed to reflect what is in a person's heart, but to reflect reality. And that's what we need, truth and reality. And it seems like governments, especially in the United States, have lost reality. And we prefer to promote untruths. Unfortunately, that's the way our nation is going. That's it, Tom.
Thank you, Lee. It's interesting you bring out the person you bring out who reported the story, Praise in New York's last name is Pagan.
Yeah, I saw that.
The irony of all of that. Anyway, Clayton, thanks again for bringing that to us today. All right, let's move on. Tracking the spread. So we do this every week. We've been following through, but we're going to just move it up into April rather than going all the way back to February and going week by week. But I want to just show you to keep up with where we're at. Beginning in April 7th, they had 1.3 million people affected with 76,000 deaths. Then a week later, on the 14th, 120,000 deaths with just under 2 million people affected. So if you'll see, as we're looking today, somewhere between 44 to 50,000 people a week are still dying of this virus. Tuesday morning, April 21st, this was last week, 171,000 deaths and almost 2.5 million people affected. And then this morning, on Tuesday morning, April 28th, they broke 3 million people. 3 million people affected with 211,000 deaths. And again, it doesn't seem to be getting worse, but it hasn't really slowed up in the past month worldwide. It may be in local areas, but that's where we are today in the coronavirus tracking. And here in America, of course, it is still moving, but it appears to be in America slowing down. Governor Cuomo on COVID-19. So let's move off of the track of the actual virus itself. We've been following the ramifications of the problems that develop from it, the attitude, the mindset, the Spirit of God, and what God tells us in His holy word. This ought to be a frightening story when you see what's going on here, particularly since New York has been hit the hardest. Look what Governor Cuomo said about COVID-19. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo captured the spirit of our age when he said in the declining coronaviruses in his state, as he was bragging about the viruses finally beginning to decline. The number is down because we brought the number down. God did not do that. Faith did not do that. Destiny did not do that. A lot of pain and suffering did that. Now, let that sink in for a moment. This type of attitude before the throne of God will not sit well with God. Even Jesus Christ, who was perfect in all His ways, He said, I can do nothing without my Father. But here, Governor Cuomo saying, God had nothing to do with this. We did it. Let me give you just one example when somebody else did that. And I'm not talking about Ananias and Sapphira in the New Testament, which a lot of people are talking about. This comes from the book of Acts, chapter 12, verses 21 through 23. Upon a set day, Herod arrived in royal apparel, and he sat on his throne and made an oration to them, very similar to what we hear Governor Cuomo. God didn't do that. We did that. All right? He made this oration to them in verse 22. So the people gave a shout saying, it is the voice of a God, not a man. And immediately the angel of the Lord smote him, because he gave not God the glory, and he was eaten up with worms, and he gave up the ghost, or gave up his spirit where it was at. I would not be surprised in the time that we begin to move in when you see supernatural things begin to take place with Satan and evil and all the things that are going to take place when the two witnesses come on, that there'll not be an event like you just see right here. When someone will stand up and defy God, that God will just not take him out right then and there. Just wanted to make everybody aware of that. It's kind of frightening when you think about it. All right, let's move on. The debt bubble. The problem that we're looking at today in the nation and around the world, it's just getting started. We have not begun to see what's going to take place coming down the pipe. They're worried about inflation. It's not going to be inflation to begin with. It's going to be a deflationary problem that who knows what's going to happen next. Because we just passed another $484 billion stimulus. That's another $500 billion. The extension of the third stimulus bill to help small businesses, all right? They are now preparing to go back to the table and to create a fourth stimulus for the state and local governments. Now, pretty much all authorities are believing that our deficit this year is going to probably be between $4 to $5 trillion. Trillion dollars in 1 year. Unbelievable, but that's true. So now, all of this is to do what? Stop the coronavirus. That's what this is all about, to stop the spread of the virus. So we've injected a new virus. It is debt. And this debt's not going to go away near as quickly as the virus will. This is going to be with us for who knows how long, if it ever leaves us again. So now, the new virus debt. I want to bring in, normally I will bring in the scripture to support the story we're telling you, but let me bring in the scriptures first so you understand why I'm bringing you the story. Psalm 37:21. The wicked borrows and pays not again, but the righteous shows mercy and gives. So here we are, is that we're borrowing, and the fact is, the government, they have no plans of paying us back. And they know they can't pay it back. There's not enough money. So you're going to see when all this settles down, at some point in time, the administration, whether this one comes in or another administration after 2024, you'll begin to see taxes rise up. They'll be talking about, we got to get this debt down. But there's no way you can tax 100% of all the economy. You will not get this debt down. There's just way too much of it. Look at Luke 14:28. For which of you intends to build a tower, sits not down first and counts the cost, whether we have sufficient enough to finish it? Here in Washington, we have our leaders saying, we don't care what it costs, just go fix it. We got a problem, go pay them, make more money, print more money. So how much are they printing? What are they doing? I'm going to show you something in this debt clock and bring out a couple of pieces of information that's going to absolutely shock you when you begin to see the reality of what's taking place to try to keep everyone safe. Deuteronomy 15:6. For the Lord your God blesses you as he promised he would, and you shall not lend to many nations, but you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow, and you shall reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over you. So what God's saying, if you're blessed, then you're going to lend to the nations, they're not going to lend to you, because you're going to be subject to those who lend to you. So with all of this debt, do you know foreign nations we owe them $7 trillion right now? Right now we owe foreign countries $7 trillion. That's on these bonds and securities and treasuries and everything they got to keep pumping out month after month, week after week, renewing all this debt that continues to take place. So now, just go ahead and pull the screen up, Jeff, and just let them get their eyes fixed on these numbers running around here. In your left-hand top box, what you're looking at is we're up to $24.7 trillion of actual debt that's due now. That's actual debt that's right now that's taking place. So you begin to look at these numbers. So, I mean, they move so fast, sometimes you can't even pay attention to what's going on. So now, see this little box we got up there? Jeff's got it. You still got it on the screen? Yeah, okay. See where that arrow's pointing? That little box is called unfunded liabilities. That means the debt that we have agreed to pay for. All right, there it is. I blew it up so you can see it a little bit better. That's $144 trillion of debt that we have said we're going to pay for. Like, I don't care what it costs. Print the money and put it out there. We need to fix this. Well, they have been doing that without a virus now for decades. And in the last 10 years to 15 years, it has skyrocketed out of sight. It's all because we didn't do what God says. The war came, right? To 2001, we got to protect ourselves. Then the crisis in 2008. Now here we are again. So now, when you look at that, do you realize what you're looking at? Every 4 seconds, will you see that arrow pointed? Every 4 seconds, the unfunded debt rises by approximately $1 million. Now let that sink into your head. $1 million of debt that we have said we're going to pay for every 4 seconds. Somebody tell me, write in, get somebody from Congress to let us know. I challenge anyone to tell me how you're going to raise enough taxes to pay for every 4 seconds $1 million. It is impossible. Nothing can fix this. And we need to get this set in our mind. Now, I did this chart that you're looking at on Friday. On Tuesday morning, take a look at unfunded liabilities. It had already jumped $3 trillion in 4 days. And I'm not making this up. These are their figures. Can you believe that? Unbelievable, but these are the facts of what we're looking at. Now, we're going to be talking in the future about a couple things. One of the things we're going to be talking about is why aren't the rest of the world fighting us on this? It's because God's holding back. But there's coming a time when the rest of the world will be secure in the fact that they don't need this nation. When that time comes, and God pulls the plug, heaven help this nation. So what God's doing right now, and I'm going to tell you the miracle of this coronavirus, there's nothing good out of it, except in God's people, what we can look at is God says he's going to do nothing until he reveal his secret to his servants first. So what you're looking at, and through all of this, in the COVID-19, is the beginning of what's going to take place when the next disaster comes. And there is no government support, and there is no trillions of dollars to put out, and the rest of the world pulls its way from us, and we go begging hat in hand, looking for help to get us out of the mess. And God's word says the Barton lovers of this nation are going to turn on us, and we will become the slave to the lender. That is coming, and you can mark it in the Bible right here, because God promised that's going to happen, unless we as a nation repent. As a nation, repent of all sins, not just part of the sins. And there's another movement coming about, which we're going to talk about very soon, and I put it out in the newsletter. I'll talk about that toward the end of this next movement, so-called a revival for our nation. But will it be a revival? I'll talk about that toward the end of the program. So now, let's go on. Let me bring out just a couple more things on the debt clock that you may have never paid attention to or nobody's talking about. In this box, there's 3 things that are taking place which is devastating for the country. The U.S. Treasury dollars now. The U.S. Treasury dollars means how much money they actually have in the Treasury to support and run a country. $788 billion. Look what it was in that little box just below that number. In 2000, they had $3.5 trillion to be able to run the country. So that means they got to keep selling treasuries to keep the nation being funded. That's why you say, well, we're out of money. We reached our debt ceiling, we're out of money. And so they have to go back and say, okay, raise the debt ceiling. They raise the debt ceiling, then they move over to here, the money supply. Why? Because the money supply is running out. The money supply now, it's up to $16 trillion. In 2000, it was 4.7 trillion. What does that mean? M2 money is created money. In other words, go print money, go make money. All right, just go print money. We don't care. Fix it. I don't care what it takes. Remember, God says that how evil it is to borrow money and not pay it back. They know they can't pay it back. But look at it. Look at the growth from 4.7 trillion to 16 trillion. They just got to keep the money flow going because they can't let the cash dry up. Once the cash dries up, the world shuts down. Everything shuts down. So they can't let that happen. Why do you think the United States was so fast to put money into circulation? Because everything was going to lock up. So the lesser of two evils, go print money. Put it out there. Put out $5 trillion. We can't shut it down. They're not telling you that. These are true stories. So then what happens? Okay, once you got the supply out there, then they go into this. It's called credit and derivatives. Now, we haven't heard derivatives since the 2008 collapse. Remember about the mortgages? They had derivatives. Everybody said, first time I heard, what's a derivative? It's when you take the money you created and you lend to whoever the borrowers are, and they'll take $100 and through derivatives it is be able to create more debt by that much money. So if a bank borrows $1 million, they only need to have like 4 to 5% of that money on hand. So then what they can do is they can go out and create more money in lending so they can lend out more money by creating from this fund over here. So look at the derivatives. $677 trillion. In other words, they're building off of money that does not exist. And they're creating more debt from money they don't have. It's like Houdini. It's just miracle. It just shows up. And there it was. Look what it was in 2000. That's when we had debt in 2000. It was 90 trillion. Now it's $677 trillion. See all of this? This is before the debt crisis today. Who knows where this is going? I don't have any idea how far it can go before God decides to pull the plug. World debt in comparison. This was a couple years ago now. Take a look at this world debt in comparison. It appears to be tearing apart the fragile framework of the European Union. This article said, Europe said the former Commission chief and the EU godfather Jacques Delors said the EU is in mortal danger. If citizens feel themselves abandoned at the heart of the pandemic, the EU would collapse. All right, so now, it is. And they're feeling like it's collapsing. Why? Because they can't create enough money to go country by country. Well, here in the United States, we go state by state. They're under one federal guideline. But in Europe, they're not yet under one guideline. But they will, because they can't fix it now. So when they begin to collapse, here begins your foundation of the financial structure for the Holy Roman revival. It will begin to collapse, and this being will now rise up, the Holy Roman Empire, and he will become like a god to this world. But those are the things you're looking at. We are now in the formulation of God bringing about the end time. And it's going to take a little bit of time, but it won't take long. It will come quicker than you ever dreamed it will. In debt comparisons, the United States versus the rest of the world, the world's huge debt load just smashed record highs. This was last year before the coronavirus, before 2019 was ever over. Look at the United States in this box. The United States represents almost 1/3 of the entire debt of the entire world. We're the biggest borrower there ever was. There ever was. By September, the debt grew by $9 trillion, the total to $253 trillion of actual debt, realized debt. It actually grew back in 2019. That puts the global GDP at the ratio of 322%. What that's telling you, the GDP, gross domestic product, that means the amount of debt all right, versus what they're actually producing to pay the debt, it's 322%. In other words, we way past being able to pay the debt. And not only us, the rest of the world. The whole world is in a calamity right now. The whole world, 322%. They can't fix their problems either. And I bring you back to a scripture that we brought out in Roaring Seas. If you haven't seen that series, go back to Roaring Seas. In fact, God's blessed us to be able to create series over the last 7 years that basically isolates specific instances for prophetic fulfillment that takes place. And in this series, it took 4 sermons to cover one scripture, Luke 21, verse 25. And in that, it brings about a word that's kind of hidden from the English. It means when it reaches the point that the world has no way to fix its problems, then the calamity begins. Where you're moving to that stage right now. The coronavirus is the slingshot that began to launch the end time scenario that you and I are looking at today. Now, I can't prove what I just told you, but I believe it exists from what I'm understanding from prophecy, and I do believe that time will bear that out, because I believe that this virus is the beginning for God's wake-up call for His church, telling us we got to get ourselves ready, be prepared, because the end is going to be coming really, really soon. That also tells us another thing, that if we're not prepared, the time of Jacob's trouble is going to catch you unaware. So we need now to prepare, to understand what's taking place. See how this virus has affected you, see how it moves, see what you lack and what you need to work on, and begin setting your house in order today. That's what we're looking at, I believe, from this. This was all before the COVID-19 virus began to affect the entire world. And I put that at the very end because the debt and everything that existed, but nobody was paying attention to it, and not even many in God's church. And I had people say, look, I'm tired of hearing about all this economic stuff. We're tired of hearing about the prophecy. We just need to tell us how to live. It's telling you how to live is what I am. I'm telling you how to live. I'm telling you how to get ready for what's coming. Because if you're not, there's not going to be much living going on. So anyway, that's really, really important that you need to understand what's taking place. All righty, let's take a break now. When we come back, the coronavirus warning for the churches, we're going to talk about the next phase is a man that God's looking for to stand in the gap from our Lincoln series. So let's take a break. Let's watch this little video. It's a very uplifting, running the race. And I'll be right back.
I am a runner.
I'm a runner.
I'm a runner.
I am a runner.
I am a runner.
I am a disciple.
I'm a disciple.
I'm a disciple.
I'm a disciple.
I don't run for an idea.
I don't run for a religion.
I run with no ordinary person.
I run in the steps of one man.
One man who wasn't afraid.
He spoke in truth and grace.
He stood up and took on sin face to face.
There is no one else like him.
He made the heavens with his breath.
He brought redemption with his death.
He came to save the wayward world of sin.
Father,
A savior.
My God.
my God,
My friend.
the blind see, the deaf hear, and the dead live again.
He has every right but does not condemn.
He came to give
Freedom from darkness,
Heart to the heartless.
love to the loveless.
courage that starts with faith in him who will never fail.
That's the one I run with.
That's the one I run with.
His name is Jesus.
His name is Jesus.
His name is Jesus.
He called my name.
He told me to take up my cross and go tell the story.
To love and to serve and to speak it boldly.
So I will run with him.
Some may laugh, others may judge.
My flesh may cry out, but I will not give in to this selfish urge.
To live for someone that stared death in the face.
Only to rise in victory from the grave.
He is for me. Who could ever stand against me?
So, with trembling hands, I no longer sit on the fence.
Lip service is not enough.
I won't just sit in a pew.
I won't bite my tongue.
But for him and through him I will run.
He has marked out a race. From the start to the finish, I will seek his face.
I will live and I will love like Jesus.
I will live and I will love like Jesus by the power and with the Spirit he has given me.
I will give up what I cannot keep to gain what I cannot lose.
So I will run with him.
I will run with him.
I will run with him.
I'll run with him. I will run with him.
I will run with him.
I will run with him. Will you?
Welcome back. They had a phrase in there I particularly liked. It was, I will give up what I cannot keep to have when I cannot lose. So that was really, really good. It was put together there. All right, let's move on here. Let's get into the second portion of the program. A man to stand in the gap of the coming bondage in America. We've been working in a series of lessons from Lincoln, and in it, this is one slide I've used once or twice before, and I'll need to bring out today because a lot centers around where God's taken us from this understanding. He said, I sought for a man that should make up the hedge to stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found none. This is an ominous warning that we're looking at Ezekiel, because Ezekiel is the prophet that was sent to Israel, but Israel was already in a captivity when God sent him. So this was a latter-day Israel. So when we talk about him, God's talking about as far as the nation goes, he's looking for someone in the nation, in its leadership, that he could call upon to stand in the gap for what was right and what is wrong. And as we understand in the end time, God tells us, and what we see here in Ezekiel, there's nobody going to stand in that gap. And we understand from the past that in Israel, that is, a nation's king did what was right, the nation was blessed. When they had an evil king, the nation was cursed. This nation will go through a period of cursing that's coming up and that we need to understand. So it's talked about a coming captivity for our nation. So what are we talking about here for a coming captivity? And what has that got to do with Israel and us today? Because a lot of people today, they don't understand that when what we're looking at today is the lost tribes of Israel still exist. And that I blew that, boy. Let me pick it up from Fort Lincoln again. I buried myself in the beginning and I couldn't get out of it. All right, you ready? All right, so now let's begin with a slide that I've used several times in this series, and I've also used it here in News Nuggets and Insights, but it's very, very important. It's found in Ezekiel 22 and verse 30. I sought for a man among them that should make up the hedge and stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found none. When we're looking at this, there's a couple things that jump out at us we need to understand. First of all, Ezekiel was a prophet to Israel. The problem is that Israel had already gone into captivity by the time God sent him to warn Ezekiel. So the book of Ezekiel is for an end time Israel. Now, people today don't understand that Israel, they think that Jerusalem and the nation they call Israel in the Middle East today is all of Israel, but it is not. The lost tribes of Israel, the 10 tribes, still exist and have been scattered throughout the world, and you don't get them united again till Christ returns. The other thing people don't understand, that the United States itself fulfills the understanding of the tribes of Joseph, as well as Britain does, Ephraim and Manasseh. With that understanding, and that's a whole nother study that you need to look into, when we look at this now, is that we're looking at God saying, in the nation, the leadership, in the ancient Israel, it was the king. When a nation did what it was supposed to, the king led the nation to God, they were blessed. If not, they were cursed. So what God's telling us now, Ezekiel, the end time Israel, the Israelite nations, that he'll be looking for a leader that can stand in the gap and bring the people back to God. And he says, I find none. And so when he said he finds none, that means they're not there. That means the nation will go into a captivity. And God talks about that captivity. So let's talk about that now, the coming captivity of this nation. Isaiah 11:11 says, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people. So that's showing us now from Isaiah, as Ezekiel warned, that when Jesus Christ returns, his people are captive again. Now that captivity takes various forms. It's not like you're all going to be going to a concentration camp. The captivity takes on many different looks, as we understand in the New Testament as well as the Old Testament. It says, and he'll remnant of his people who will be left from Assyria and from Egypt, from Pathros, Cush, Edom, Shinar, Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. So now, when we look at today, moving us into the captivity, in other words, the bondage state, we begin to look at two things, or three things really. First, the virus now has brought us into a wake-up call for the church, as we covered in the first part of this program. Second is the beginning of the first phase of our captivity. What is that? It is the economic removal, our funds. The third is it lays the groundwork for the second phase of removal. And what is that? So if we want to understand what it all is, we just simply need to go back and look at what they had in the past. God says, if you want to know what I'm going to do, go back and look at what I did. By understanding this, believe it or not, we can track the beginning of the first phase of activity and moving into the second phase of activity from the past. What was the formula for ancient Israel? The Assyrians came out of the north to destroy Israel. Israel bought them off by paying tribute. It was the first phase of their removal. Now, what's ironic here is President Trump made this statement. He says, I want all Americans to understand we are at war with an invisible enemy, and that enemy is no match for the spirit of resolve for the American people. So he's talking about an invisible enemy. And who are we fighting? Ephesians tells us. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Now, we cover these phases of removal in a series, another series that we've done over the last 7 years. It's called The Rebirth of Israel, 1776, The Rebirth of Israel. And in it, we talk about Israel going into captivity. So now, history shows us that Israel went into captivity in successive ways. Frederick Haberman talks about the beginning in 745 in 2 Kings 15:29, talking about Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria coming in and beginning to remove the Israelites from their nation. But he's actually got the date a little bit wrong, and I covered that in the series of where we're looking at. Because where I've got this middle box, Haberman has that box here where 1520 is, talking about this is the first phase. Not understanding the first phase was economics. Now you see that in 2 Kings 15:20. So when he came in, when Menahem came into Israel to destroy Israel, Israel did what? He bought off the enemy. He paid tribute. So what are we doing with this virus that's giving us the financial ruin? We're buying it off by putting out millions and trillions of dollars to be able to fight off this enemy, this invisible enemy. We see the physical. God says the former, the physical, the latter, the spiritual. So what we're looking at is the latter spiritual becoming to fulfillment of fighting this invisible enemy. And don't think for a moment that this thing from China is just an accident. There's more to it going on, and I'm going to bring that out next week in this program, News Nuggets and Insights. And I'm going to give a pretty thorough, piece-by-piece story of what's going on. It may take most of the program, but it's important that you understand where we're at and how this ties in. So now, it was the beginning of the removal from Israel's wealth. Second phase is their loss of their own governance. Now, this is important because if the United States goes under another government, even if we do it willingly, it follows the same pattern because Israel voluntarily went under the leadership of the governance of Syria rather than fight them. And the third is the loss of their identity. And then we understand the third removal for us. It says that Satan is going to go after the elect, and it says he will overcome them. You have, in the history of Israel, laying out what's in store spiritually for God's people and this nation. 1776, they came back to their wealth. As they went into captivity, they came back out of captivity. 1789, that's when the Constitution was actually adopted by all states. even though it was set in place in 1787. In 1803 was the beginning of the fulfillment of our destiny, and it's the Louisiana Purchase which opened the way to the west, all the way through to California. So as Israel went into captivity, it comes back out of captivity. So now let's take a look at it on the timeline that we had in Lincoln. So we go from 2017 to where we are today in 2020 with the coronavirus. First wave, removal of wealth. Follows the exact same pattern. Second wave, giving up our national governance. Now, will that happen in 2024? I don't know. It could happen in this election. When the left gets in, they have already made movement to say that they will accept and begin to change the Constitution to be governed through this new Green Deal, a national, worldwide, giving up nationality, giving up to worldwide governance and accepting the UN in its resolutions in this country. When that happens, you will know that you have just moved into the second wave. Remember, God says he'll do nothing unless he reveal his secret? That's what we're looking at. All right, that's exactly what we're looking at. Third wave, it was given him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And that'll happen just before the return of Jesus Christ. So what you're looking at the beginning of the final phase of God's plan for 6,000 years. The servant, the stranger that is within you shall get high above you, and you shall come down very low. He shall lend to you, and you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail. These are the results of the curses for not following God. Verse 47, same chapter in Deuteronomy. Because you serve not the God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things, therefore you shall serve your enemies, which the Lord your God shall send against you in hunger and thirst and nakedness and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron on your neck until he has destroyed you. So next time you hear Governor Cuomo or any of the people in Washington say, God didn't do that, we did that. Think about these things, because it ought to make your blood boil and shudder to know what's coming when God hears that. And it's only a matter of time till God decides it's time to pull the plug. All right, let's begin to wrap it up now from the home office. Last week we put into the mail Jacob's Trouble by Danny Ellis. In part one of the sermon series I'm working on right now, Lessons from Lincoln. By the way, this week, tomorrow, on Saturday, so if you're watching this on Friday, on tomorrow, I'm doing a conclusion to this series, part 3 on Lessons for Lincoln. So if you don't have anywhere to go, most of us are shut down, tune in. It's a really, really important sermon that you want to hear. Also, we put out this week the newsletter, Can God Call Good What He Has Declared Evil? And I'm talking about a coming revival that's going to take place this September. If you haven't heard about it, you're going to hear about it. And we're going to show you and talk about what God says about that type of revival, whether God can bless it or not. It's going to be in the sermon that I'm going to deliver on the third Sabbath of this month, and it's called, Can God Call Good What He Has Declared Evil? All right, so that's all coming up this month, so you want to stay tuned what's all going on. Now, Syracuse. State of Indiana is opening up May 15th, so the Syracuse congregation for our building up in Syracuse with Steve Council are going to hold their first service back again in their building on May 16th. Then on Pentecost weekend, just a couple weeks later, they're having a big Pentecost weekend. So if you're in the area, please get in touch with Steve Council, 574-584-2001, or you can have them at secouncilcomcast.net. So this is a multi-state area-wide for Pentecost weekend, and they've already arranged special pricing for the motel for if anybody attends the entire weekend. So if you finally want to get out, feeling safe, they're having a big get-together for Pentecost weekend. So in Syracuse, by all means, get in touch, and if you're in the area, you might want to attend. You have a great time. By the way, if your congregation has events going on, because I know people are listening all around the country, send it in. Let us know, and we'll help promote it for you. See what you got to help those in your area, to let them know what's going on in your area. Now, next week, as I told you, I'm going to be talking more about this coronavirus and the phases of events that takes place, because it appears now this just wasn't an accident that took place. Nobel Prize winning scientists who discovered the HIV, all right, says the coronavirus was created in a laboratory, and he supports it in a video I have, and he talks about exactly what took place and why this is the problem. So we're going to talk about this next week. So I'm going to leave with the question. It says this: if you were China, what would you do if you want to level the playing field with America? For the last couple of years, President Trump has put a lot of pressure on China. He's got the tariffs, he's got embargo, you name it, he's got stuff out there, and he continually talks about how we're getting better, they're getting worse. If you were going to save face, and you want to level the playing field, and you wanted to stop all of this, what would you do? I'm going to talk about that next week and bring you a lot of information. Some you may have heard, some I'm almost positive you haven't heard yet. And it all goes back to next week with this Nobel Prize winning scientist who says he's not going to be bullied and he's not backing off from the evidence that he's proven to be true. Well, that's it for our program this week. So now we are out of the winter and everybody's waiting to go play at the beach. Some of them already playing. So here we are saying, can we come out for summer? So anyway, let's close our program now. I've got a video here. It's called God Wrote a Book. It's about 4.5 minutes long, a little longer than we normally play, but it's really a good video. Take a look, and I'll be right back to close our program.
God wrote a book. That reality blows me away every time I stop to think about it. Pages and pages of God, His thoughts, His words, His heart, right there, just a few inches away. I can carry it with me everywhere I go, read it whenever I want. When we open the Bible, what do we see? We see God Himself in this book. We meet Him here or we don't meet Him, not with any hope of friendship. Reading the Bible is one of the most important things we can ever do. It's more valuable than anything we own, sweeter than anything we have ever eaten. It is literally more important than breathing. But that's not always what we see and feel when we open our Bible. Our weak, tired, distracted eyes look, and all we see is a lifeless, boring portrait on the wall. But it's not a portrait. It's a window. It doesn't hang lifeless in an old frame on the wall. It breaks through the wall into another world, the real world, the lasting world, the better world. And through this window shines a divine light that changes everything around us. We all know that the road to knowing God is not easy. Discipline and resolve are important, but they can carry you only so far. A few days, a week, maybe a month. For the long run, we need something stronger, more compelling than discipline and resolve. There are too many traps along the path, too many hurdles. At the root, the reason we don't read the Bible is that we don't want to read the Bible. We don't see joy, peace, and life when we see that leather binding on our shelf. We see a wall, not a window. The boring portrait, not the never-ending beauty beyond. So we put it off, leave it shut, and move on. We stay in bed, and we miss the miracle. The God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," loves to speak light into hearts and minds. God wrote a book, and with his book, these words in front of us. He wakens our dead, bored souls. He frees us from bondage to sin, from desires that rob us of life. He comforts the depressed, inspires the discouraged, guides the confused. He empowers us to make our lives count for His cause in the world. He satisfies us completely and forever with words, His words. So, will I read my Bible tomorrow? Where else would I go? How else will I know Him? How else will I prepare myself to enjoy Him forever? Yes, I'll spend the rest of my life looking out of this window, watching, waiting for another sight of Him, another miracle, another glimpse of my God.
That's it for our program. Man, put your nose in that Bible. God's character and everything about Him is revealed through His holy word. Well, that's it for our program today. Thanks again for watching. And I want to thank everybody for sharing this with others, because the subscription is growing. Every single week we're having more and more people subscribing to News Nuggets and Insights, and we're getting a lot of positive feedback thanks to you and sharing it with everybody you know. And remember, as we close every program, share this with everybody you know. We're going to love you for it, or not. Until next week, God be with you.